The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome from the General Assembly and the City of Richmond. I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports and the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. We are truly honored to have a very special guest this morning, the Democratic leader in the State Senate, Senator Dick Saslaw. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Woody.
Good to see you.
Well, it's good to be here, particularly after the long day we had on the floor yesterday.
You sure did, and we're a little bit beyond the halfway mark
Right.
in this 45-day session. There was a lot of debate yesterday about transportation. I understand no transportation bill was reported from the Senate floor. Tell us what happened and why.
Well, the governor put in a bill that would have repealed the gasoline tax and raised the sales tax almost a full percent. To make up for that. The problem with that is that you would have given a free ride to all the out-of-state people, and depending on whose numbers you use, out-of-state purchases account for anywhere from 20 to 30% of the gasoline tax that's collected. And people who don't even own a car would have been forced to pay for the roads.
Through the sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, the problem with that was that by doing that, we not only would have not had enough money, okay, but he also wanted to take $250 million a year out of the general fund. Right now, we are the 7th wealthiest state in America on a per capita basis, yet we're 37th in how we fund public schools, 47th in how we fund higher education. And you can't continue to do that. And by doing what the governor wanted to do, it would have made a bad situation where we are vastly underfunding K through 12 and higher ed even worse. And his plan would have only generated at peak about $600 million a year, which would just solve the maintenance problem of draining money from the construction fund. We have a $1.2 billion maintenance fund, $1.6 billion construction. We went through that last year and borrowed $500 million out of the construction fund. As a result, my county, which used to get $28 million in secondary road construction, we haven't gotten a dime for the last 3 years. We used to get $28 million a year. The governor's thing didn't fix that at all. Plus, it drained money desperately needed out of the general fund. So that failed. Then Senator Newman offered a substitute on the floor, which would have only brought in about $200 to $300 million a year, if that. So that wouldn't have even solved the maintenance fund, and it did nothing, which is why Cuccinelli, the Attorney General, endorsed it. Okay, that got defeated 22 to 18, which 2 of the Republicans voted against it. Then Senator Wagner put in his, which was a percentage, an 8%, would have repealed the gas tax in its current cents per gallon and made it 8% at the rack. Statewide today, that would generate about 25 cents, but the rack has gone up about 40 cents over the last 4 or 5 weeks. Now, the statewide average over the last year, that 8% would have produced about 5 cents a gallon more, and that's all. He also had a provision in there that if Congress repealed the ban on internet sales tax, that money would go to transportation. And that was almost half his plan. And to base your transportation plan on something that has not happened to date and may never happen, and if Congress does repeal, they may keep all the money themselves. So, and that plan, 12 or 13 of the 20 Republicans didn't vote for it.
So they voted against that.
They voted against that. Well, five took a walk, rather than vote no.
Right.
and I think, and then 8 more voted no.
So let me make sure I understand in terms of the piece parts. Repeal the 17.5 cents
Right.
currently.
That's the governor's plan.
Also, $15 registration fee and a $100 fee on cars that use alternative fuels.
That used alternative fee every year.
Right, right.
In other words, because in the governor's mind, they weren't paying enough. They didn't pay enough gas tax, but yet what I don't understand is he's repealing the gas tax. So why bother to penalize the people who have these Priuses?
Now, is there any credence to the suggestion that if the gas tax is repealed, that I will see that as a consumer?
You'll see that as a consumer when elephants can fly. Okay? As you know, I've been in that business for 30 years.
Right.
More than likely what would happen, and to give you an example behind what I'm about to tell you, North Carolina has a gas tax that's 21 cents higher than Virginia's, almost 22 cents higher. Their statewide average last summer was about 2 to 3 cents lower than Virginia's, not 21 cents. In the winter, it's about 8 cents, 8 to 10 cents lower, not 21.
Right.
Okay? And if you repeal it, the oil companies would probably go down that first night, 16, 17 cents a gallon. Over the next few weeks, it would drift right back up again. The consumers wouldn't benefit one thing. It'd be a windfall for the oil companies, and everybody knows what desperate financial straits they're in. It just wouldn't make a shred of sense. The consumers wouldn't benefit one bit from that. It would just be a gift to the major oil companies.
Now, we've been nibbling around this issue for years. There have been attempts at patchwork quilt kind of solutions. I know in 2011 the state borrowed about $4 billion. There is some new construction going on.
Well, what the governor did was he took the bonds that were enacted into law to be spread out over about a 13, 14, 15-year period that Bill Howe got passed in his bill, Speaker Howe, back in 2007. And it was really the bonds that Bill Howe, that Speaker Howe, had put into law. And what he did was he accelerated, those. And the result of that is the next 2 or 3 governors can't bond anything. If we have desperately needed projects, we can't bond because he's taken our debt limit all the way to our self-imposed ceiling. He's taken it right to that. In fact, I was going to put in a constitutional amendment, and did, to make it that, to put it in the Constitution, it couldn't be more than 5% of the general fund, the debt, and the administration opposed it.
Now, in your opinion, what is the solution?
You need to go up on a cents per gallon and index it to the non-residential construction index. That would go up about 3 to 4% a year. So in other words, take it up to about 27 cents a gallon. We'd be 3 cents higher than Maryland, but Maryland is going to go up probably next year anyway in the district. North Carolina is already 20-some cents above us. So what you would do is you would then index that. That's $500 million right there, and that stops the bleeding. That stops us bleeding the construction fund every year to make up the maintenance deficit.
Is that because the law requires us to do maintenance?
You have to do maintenance. It has to come off the top.
Okay.
Okay? Before you can build anything, you got to maintain them. Then, and we're not doing a good job of that. I talked to people who were on the Commonwealth Transportation Board, which makes these decisions, who were on there in the 80s. They had a policy of re-asphalting all the roads in the state of Virginia every 7 years. Now it's once every 14 years.
Double.
And then I wanted to go up 1% on the sales tax. And by the way, Maryland's at 6%. D.C., I think, is even higher than that. North Carolina, because it varies from municipality to municipality, they're over 7%. So we wouldn't even be near them. Tennessee's at 9.5%. They don't have an income tax. one half of that money, 1.5%, would go to transportation. That would generate another $500 million, and 500 to 550, and now you're at the billion that you desperately need.
I see.
Now you're at the billion. The other $500 million would go to education, 2/3 to K through 12, and 1/3 to higher ed. And as I've said before, while we're the 7th wealthiest state in America, we're 36th or 37th in what we give K through 12, and 47th in what we give higher education.
Now
we're losing professors at UVA, Tech, William & Mary. They're getting better offers way out of state because they're not getting paid here.
So what's going to break this gridlock, the gridlock we have in Northern Virginia? Now we've got gridlock or deadlock in the Senate.
Well, we didn't get into that gridlock in Northern Virginia overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight. You can't road build your way out of it. We're going to have to start putting a bigger emphasis on transit, both in Tidewater and in Northern Virginia. And a lot of municipalities have tried to road build their way out of it, and it hasn't worked. We tried it in Washington, and we've given up in the Washington metropolitan area. New York never tried it. Okay, they knew it couldn't work. Atlanta tried it, they quit. Now, they're going at Houston's tried it, hasn't worked there. LA tried it. San Francisco gave up about 30 years ago trying to do that. And that's how, we've got to start emphasizing that. But you can't do it for free. You can't do it for free. You're going to need a lot of money, okay, and a motivation to the people to get out of their car and use transit. And keep in mind, this is coming from somebody who made a pretty good living selling gasoline. I mean, but it's not going to work. So you need the incentives to get people, to carpool or use the mass transit. Now, the hot lanes will help some, but they're not going to solve all of our problems.
Now, I think that was one of the points made in the recent Wall Street Journal editorial about the transportation package that was introduced by the governor here.
Yeah, it really didn't do anything. And, when you sit there and you look at the $1.4 billion of the taxpayers' money that he's blowing to build 460, which is literally a road from nowhere to nowhere, because it doesn't, it doesn't start in any major city, doesn't end in any major city, and worse than that, the projection on that is 5,500 cars a day. I have subdivision streets that carry more than that. It is the most I've been here, this is my 38th session, Woody. That's the most outrageous and biggest waste of the taxpayers' money in all the years I've been in the General Assembly. I mean, it is an absolute fraud on the taxpayers. And when you consider that the Dulles Toll Road carries, you ready for this, over 100,000 cars a day.
A day, 100,000.
A day, okay? And that money could have been used for that. But forget that just for the time being. In Tidewater, they're going to lose they're going to lose an aircraft carrier if they don't do something about the situation down there. This does nothing for that. The Navy did not request this. The Port Authority did not request this. This has been a pet project for the governor since he's been in the House of Delegates. And there's no one in this country who can fathom spending $1.4 billion for a road that will carry 5,500 cars a day.
And of course, this was the sole reason, as I understand it, that the Commonwealth lost its #1 ranking.
That's correct.
Yes, as a business-friendly environment.
Right, because of the transportation.
Now, you mentioned Tidewater. I've heard the term describe Nova and then the rest of Virginia in terms of
Nova and Rova.
Right. Talk to us a little bit about that distinction.
Well, you've got, it's what's happening is that the, as we spend less and less money on education as a percentage of the budget. It used to be in the high 40s, now it's 33% on K through 12. The gap between Northern Virginia and the rest of the state is widening, and it's widening dramatically. When I got here, Northern Virginia was about 16% of the population and about 27% of the students in higher education. And when I talk about Northern Virginia, I'm saying Planning District 8, Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William, and the cities that are within them. Now, we're about 29% of the population, and 57% of the in-state enrollment in our three major schools, UVA, Tech, and William and Mary, and it's getting to be the same at Christopher Newport and schools like that, because we've starved higher education, so the tuition has been rising dramatically. And by the way, also VCU, been rising dramatically, and as we pour a lot more into education because we've got more resources, that gap widens between Northern Virginia and the rest of Virginia. And it's only going to get worse unless we start, spending more money on K through 12. The governor has all kinds of, ideas, but they hardly cost any money. You can't fix this for free. He thinks you can.
Some of his ideas relate to teacher salary raises. Some of his ideas relate to reforming teacher contracts, bringing Teach to America to the Commonwealth.
It's not going to fix the thing. You're pecking at the edges. First off, he's real big on charter schools. Okay, for the most part, there are very few successful charter schools in America. There are some in the district, but by and large, the rest of them have been a nightmare. And that's been the experience all across the country. Teacher contracts, that's not the problem. He's going, 2% teacher pay raise this year. Like I said earlier, we're the 7th wealthiest state on a per capita basis. On a statewide average, Virginia teachers rank 31st in America in pay.
31st.
If you pull Northern Virginia out of the equation, they drop, I think, to about 40th. If you pull Northern Virginia out of the equation, they drop to 40th.
Wow.
I mean, it's disgraceful what we've done. And in higher education, it's even worse.
Now, that's another reason why businesses stay here and are attracted here, especially to your district. I think there are 5 major...
Our region.
Yeah, but there are 5 major universities within, what, an hour?
Within about an hour.
Yeah, right.
You've got George Mason. You got George Washington. You got Georgetown. You got the University of Maryland. You got that Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab.
Right.
I mean, there's plenty of reasons for them to be there, because they can have continuing education for their own, STEM personnel.
Science, technology, engineering.
And on top of that, I remember 32 years ago, when Mobil, moved its headquarters to Fairfax County, Virginia. I asked them, I said, why Fairfax? And they said, proximity to Washington and the public schools here in Fairfax County.
Now talk to us a little bit about your Senate district, because you have probably the most renowned high school in that district. And we talked about STEM for a second,
right.
Science, technology, engineering,
Thomas Jefferson School for Science and Technologies is the top high school in America. And I didn't see the numbers for last year, but the year before, 30 of their kids enrolled at MIT, and probably 75 to 100 in Ivy League. It's a fabulous school. It's a magnet school that all of essentially Planning District 8 plus Fauquier County, but not the city of Alexandria. They all participate in that, and they're allocated, X amount of students. The biggest number obviously comes from Fairfax, but it's just done wonderful things. They've just it's just, I can't say enough good things about that school. And the kids have to write a paper to get out of there that in most colleges and universities would be at master's degree level.
And I think they had a project where they put together a wheelchair that's operated by brainwaves.
By brainwaves,
I believe.
Yeah.
Your district is inside the Beltway primarily, except for
the bulk of it. The bulk of it is inside the Beltway. I have about 5 or 6 precincts outside the Beltway, but the bulk of them are inside the Beltway.
And do you have a lot of federal employees in your district?
Probably a fair amount, yeah.
So is sequestration a worry?
It is a worry. It's a big problem. Now, if it's not so much a problem with the federal employees as with the federal contracting employees, that are located in that Tyson's Corner and Reston corridor, as well as the Crystal City area.
And of course, it's a concern because of the number of military installations throughout the Commonwealth.
Throughout the Commonwealth, we're a taker state. We get more from the federal government than we contribute, and we are very reliant on the defense industry.
Now, you are a member of about 5 very important committees on the Senate side. Talk to us a little bit about those. I think finance is probably
it is.
The most.
That's what allows the government to operate. And we got a great chairman in Walter Stosh. The subcommittee chairmen do well, but the backbone of that committee is the Senate finance staff. It's headed by Betsy Daly, and their work is just sensational. Without them, without that staff, we don't have a government, and so it works well. Walter is very, very good at putting everything together and holding the whole group together. And there's 16 or 15, I guess 15 on the committee, and probably 15 different ideas on what ought to be done. And Walter has done an outstanding job, and as has Chuck Colgan, who was his predecessor, and John Chichester and Stanley Walker and Hunter before them. We've been very lucky to have people who have been able to grasp how the state operates financially.
And what are the subject matters that you addressed? Obviously,
well,
a lot of money issues.
The two biggest, the big drivers are education and Medicaid. And the Medicaid issue is a big issue. Right. We're hopeful the Senate budget will include, when it finally passes, a Medicaid expansion. Those 300,000 or 400,000 people, they're going to get health care, but if they get it by showing up at the emergency rooms of all these hospitals around the state, that shows up the next year. We're going to pay for it, okay? It shows up the next year in your health care bills, and the state gets also billed for that, by the hospitals. So the problem is, if we don't, enter into the agreement with the federal government, the $2 billion that would come to us goes elsewhere. And the government's willing to pay till 2016 for 100% of the expansion. And then it drops over the next 4 years down to 90%. But for us to just reject that, when we're going to have to pay for it anyways, both through the private and public sectors, is silly.
Well, it also, as I understand, will bring jobs to the Commonwealth.
The estimate is about 30,000.
And is there any substantive objection to that? In your opinion?
The Republicans in the House and some in the Senate still can't get over the fact that the president was reelected and that the Affordable Health Care Act is here to stay. 71 industrialized democracies all are able to do this. Secretary Hazel pointed out that the United States spends 17.8% of its gross domestic product on health care. The next nearest nation to us is Switzerland with 11.3. Now, to put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of 2 DOD budgets.
2 Department of Defense budgets.
That's the difference between 11.3 and 17.8. On top of that, our outcomes, he says, are not all that good, and with those other countries it's better. First of all, they have longer lifespans than we do. They're able to get it right, and we ought to be able to get it right. And everybody you talk to admits that the system we have now isn't working.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because a lot of countries have adopted our economic system and our political system, but what about our health care system?
It is interesting. You brought up a great point. Every one of these countries And now China. Okay, whoever thought? Mao Zedong's got to be turned over in his grave. They've all adopted our economic model. Not a single one of them has adopted our healthcare model. I mean, that ought to tell us something.
Now, you also are a budget conferee.
Well, I may not be this year because there's only two of us. I think it'll be Senators Colgan and Senator Howe.
But your experience as a budget conferee is relevant.
Right.
What generally happens during that process?
Well, the staff does an awful lot of work to try to, fine-tune, to get the thing where both sides will agree. I mean, there's a lot of trust put in the staff. I mean, the members will set the guidelines. The staff will work out the details.
And that happens at the very end of the session?
At the very end of the session. Usually. Hopefully, you don't have to extend it. Now, right. Sometimes we do.
Now, what about work on your other committees, like Commerce and Labor?
That's that handles, as it would imply, the commerce of the state. Your insurance industries, your utility industries, your general business law applications, all that goes through Commerce and Labor. Labor laws, workman's comp, all that. It's a real important committee. Actually, they're all important. Education and health, finance, courts of justice, Commerce and Labor, and then the fifth committee is rules, which is usually made up of all the committee chairmen, which are in the majority party, and 4 from the other party. I mean, we have a 20-20 split in the Senate, but when they reorganize, the lieutenant governor, who's a Republican, voted, for their reorganization plan.
And I take it that's why the governor's transportation package wasn't able to move yesterday, because the lieutenant governor can't break a tie on revenue-related matters.
But it wouldn't have mattered. None of the votes were close, were tied. In other words, the substitute by Senator Newman went down 22-18, and the substitute by Senator Wagner went down, I think, 28-7.
So far, how does this session, this 45-day session, compare to last year's? One of the examples may be at least you stayed away from a lot of the hot-button social issues.
We did, and a lot of people should get credit for that.
Now,
both parties.
Good. We've got about 30 seconds left. I just have one other question. There's this concept of a citizen legislator here in the Commonwealth. Things have become much more complicated over time. Do you think we can maintain that?
It's tougher and tougher because, before when I first got here, when you left, that was pretty much it. You might have come back to Richmond once a year during the intervening 10 months. Now, with all these study commissions and the work done by the committees, you're back here a few times a month, and it's become a full-time legislator almost for $18,000 a year.
Wow.
Citizens get a good deal.
Thank you, sir, for being here. Senator Dick Saslaw, the leader of the Democrats in the state Senate. We're glad to see you.
Well, thank you very much, Woody, for having me here today.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. Until next time, I am Woody Evans.